The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories.
Conspiracy theories.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy.
Because it is not the government of the people any longer. Most people do not understand the Illuminati.
A new world order. A world where the rule of law governs the conduct of nations.
Conspiracy theories.
It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations.
A new world order.
Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised.
It's the Weekend Vigilante Show.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Weekend Vigilante Show. I am your host, Sheila Zielinski, joined by my co-host, the one and only, Dr. Timothy Ball, for February 13, 2014. What an incredible show today, folks. On our show today, we're talking about smart meters, or as they've been referred to as spy meters. But it's not just the surveillance Big Brother issue here. It's the bigger overarching issue of EMR, wireless radiation, and the totality of all these devices and the culmination of what it's doing to the human body. So we're going to get into the guts of this issue with some amazing experts in a roundtable discussion. And ladies and gentlemen, I just could spend a week on the impressive bios of my guests today. Our first guest is the highly acclaimed Dr. Laura Pressley. She's worked for over 22 years in the science and semiconductor industry as an engineer, manager at Motorola, Advanced Micro Devices, and Freescale Semiconductor. She's authored numerous peer-reviewed research publications and U.S. patents. She's a government accountability activist in Texas. She's testified against the TSA, fluoridation of municipal tap water, and most recently worked on implementing the first smart meter opt-out program in Texas. Our second guest is Jerry Flynn. Jerry's a former captain in communication electronics engineering branch of the Royal Canadian Navy, an expert on electronic warfare. He's worked closely with the NSA. He's studied virtually every aspect of wireless radio communications, specializing in the radio frequency spectrum and electromagnetic radiation. Flynn's highly acclaimed international presentations illuminate the harm which smart meters and pulsed microwave radiation are doing to human beings and all life. And finally, Elizabeth Barris, an advocate who's launched a mass tort lawsuit against Edison and PG&E for health effects from smart meters and smart grid technologies under her smart meter opposition group. She's currently working on a documentary film on the issue of electromagnetic radiation and health effects, exposing how industry and government have gone to great lengths to hide this information from the public. So, ladies and gentlemen, a privilege to have the three of you weighing in on what Tim and I believe is one of the most important issues facing us. So, welcome to the program. Let's jump right into things. Dr. Laura, first tell our listeners what got you involved in the issue of smart meters.
Well, that's a really good question. My husband and I had our smart meter installed here in Austin, Texas, about 2 or 3 years ago. And what we started noticing, which at the time you really don't understand that what's happening to you, but our health started being impacted, and we would be laying in bed, going to sleep, and I would be reading a book, and my husband would go to sleep before me. And his body would start twitching. His leg would kind of involuntarily kick. So he was having these muscle contractions, and we were like, oh, that's interesting. We didn't really understand what it was. And then he would tell me that when I was asleep first and he would be reading a book, watching TV or something, I would kick and I would kind of jerk my body. And we're both engineers, and so we really are amazed at, different phenomenon that's around us. And so he started counting the seconds between the twitches. And it was very interesting. We found it was about every 25 seconds our the muscles would contract in our leg just involuntarily.
Wow.
And we were like, this has got to be an external stimuli. This is not a biological process. We spent, a couple years kind of joking with each other, about this. And then it got to the worse and worse, and I started noticing my face every time I would try to take a nap on the weekend or something. My face would vibrate every 25 seconds. And so we were on a huge mission to try to understand what around our home was. We knew it was an electrical discharge. We didn't know what it was from, though. And we, spent a long time trying to figure this out. And we found out that it was our smart meter was pulsing every 25 seconds. We bought a meter and measured those pulses, and they were consistent. So we contacted our energy company here in Austin, and we told them, hey, we are pulsing and vibrating every 25 seconds. Can you, come out and turn the radio emitter of the smart meter off and see if it goes away? And it did. So it's interesting, the timing was consistent, and when they came and turned the smart meter off, they can turn the radio emitter off, we stopped twitching. And so then I was on a mission to, my background is chemistry and physics, and I'm like, now, thank you for turning mine off, but what about the rest of the people in our community that are having issues? They don't even know how to diagnose this kind of stuff. So that's what got me started.
Well, and when you say you got somebody to come and shut that off, now was that somebody from the company, or was this just an individual that disengaged the pulsating?
It was the electric company, and they were, and it was interesting when the engineers from the electric company, it's called Austin Energy, came out to our home. They were surprised. They had been told, and they were under the impression that the thing only pulsed maybe once every 6 hours, and we showed them it was not. And it was pulsing at a very high power density. The power density it was pulsing was about 65,000 microwatts per meter squared, which is very high for an electronic device in our homes and anywhere. So they were surprised, and they were like, well, let us turn this off. We can turn the emitter off, and let's see what happens. And the twitching stopped. So we knew how to turn it off.
Well, I mean, of course, everybody's heard of them, but what are smart meters? Give us your definition on really what these are.
Well, basically, it's very simple. They're a digital computer that emits wireless radio frequency and microwave radiation back to the electric company so they can read your electric usage. It is a remote automated system. Now, there's another type of smart meter that does not emit the wireless radiation, the radio frequency and microwave frequencies. They just emit back through the electrical lines, the electrical pulses to the electric company. Those also have a problem, even though they don't have the radiation emissions. They have this component called a switching mode power supply, and that generates a lot of dirty electricity through the circuitry of our homes. And so, the wireless models have, you get a problem with the wireless emissions, but then you also get a problem with the dirty electricity that it produces. So overall, these things are incredibly dangerous to the health of the body.
Jerry Flynn, weigh in on that. What I understand them to be is, I guess, EMR, for lack of a better word. There's many different things they call them, like electromagnetic radiation, digital pulse microwave radiation. Can you explain more of the proper term for what these things are?
Well, EMR, of course, as you say, stands for electromagnetic radiation. It simply is the radiation that is emitted by any transmitting device that uses the radio frequency spectrum, which includes the microwave frequencies as well.
Right, okay. Essentially, I mean, would it be fair to say, both this question is posed to Dr. Pressley and you, Jerry, that we are absolutely inundated with this? We're bathed in this because if you look at some of these smart devices and the smart grid, smart technology, smart TV, smart appliances, we've got the CIA director, of course, last year saying, we're going to be spying on you through your smart appliances. I mean, this is a sci-fi, but really get into some of the more mind-boggling issues around these kind of devices.
Okay. I think that, we cannot, Mr. Flynn just mentioned, we can't see these these waves. One of the things that's really insidious about this whole issue is that if you wouldn't be laying in bed and have your partner be turning the light on and off every 25 seconds. Imagine trying to sleep with that. Imagine what your body would go through day after day, night after night with that occurring. That is an absolute ludicrous thing that we would tolerate that exposure on and off every 25 seconds. Because basically this is what's happening with these radio frequencies and these microwave radiation wavelengths. We can't see them with our eyes, But I'll tell you
Right.
what, our body can feel it, and our body is sensing this light coming on and off. And so just imagine what kind of health we would have if we were constantly in an environment where we were turning the lights on and off every 25 seconds. We couldn't sleep. Our immune systems would be absolutely destroyed, and we couldn't heal. And so that's what's happening right now to people. We can't see this stuff, and it's just we're surrounded. If you look at all the wireless devices we have just every day, they're just increasing in, numbers on top of numbers. You have your router. You have your cordless phone. You have your cell phone. Cell phones today, the iPhone 5S emits 11,000 microwatts per meter squared. Okay? That is like having a smart meter in your pocket. And I want to challenge people, and this is a hard thing. We love technology. We love convenience. But I'll tell you what, there is a negative side to this, and we have so many people that are concerned about having smart meters on their side of their home, but they're carrying a smart meter, i.e. smartphone, in their pocket and talking on it on a daily basis, constantly. And some people have them on their on their nightstands at night, and these things continue to emit even when you're not using them. You are basically now a cell tower. This is how these components work. The owners of the cell phone, you're sitting there with it in your pocket, it is transferring signal from you to the next person who's nearest with another similar kind of phone, and the next person, and the next person. We are now a network of communication for these telecommunications companies. Instead of putting up cell towers, they are now using us as being individual cell towers, and that is the power density that these things are emitting. So I just want us to understand every single day there's a new device, a Xbox, a PlayStation. All of these things are wireless technology, and they don't turn off when you turn
and baby
the power
monitors
off.
even.
Baby monitors. Imagine this. I have seen pictures recently of just infants carrying, they took a picture of this infant holding an iPhone 5S.
Oh,
and
my
I tell
Lord.
you what, I got nauseous when I saw it. People just do not understand. They think these devices are, simple. They think that if they carry them around, that someone else who's marketing and developing these products has thought about our safety, and they have not.
Dr. Lore, you mentioned that, really interesting, you mentioned just quickly here before I let Jerry weigh in on this, you mentioned cell phones being essentially carrying around a smart meter in your pocket. Everybody has a smartphone, and the interesting thing is in 96, there was a document called the Terror Papers, and they talked about, genetic experiments and alluding to the idea of implanting people with microchips, but of course that wouldn't be very practical since people wouldn't likely go for it. And then they asked how they could make people carry a device voluntarily, and it goes on to say that there was one device available on the market that matched the frequency of the brain, and that device was a cellular phone. When you look at the megahertz, these things are, as far as wavelengths, the microwatts, etc., there's 75,000 microwatts, and that pulses not in a continuous emission. Is that safe to say?
Absolutely, yes, they pulse. And one thing, I just want people to realize you don't have to carry an iPhone. I have a kind of a cheap flip phone that it puts out about 500 microwatts. It's way less than 11,000 when it's being used, and it doesn't continuously emit. So there are options, and, not to your head, keeping it away from your body in speaker mode. And right now I'm on a landline because I'm not going to sit here, during the interview and have this phone up to my ear. So there are conscious choices we can make to reduce the exposure and to prioritize the exposure. So I just want people to understand that we just have new devices on a, quarterly basis that hit the market, and people are breaking. Our bodies right now are so inundated, they're breaking.
And then, of course, there's other studies with physiologically, neurologically, our DNA, red blood cells. The list goes on and on and on. Weigh in on that, Jerry.
It's like what scientists say today is that if indeed you could see EMR, or what the scientists call electrosmog, you would not be able to see your hands in front of your face. That is how thick it is. And picking up what Laura said like a few moments ago, when you look at technology, how it has evolved from the AM radios in the 1920s, radar in the 1930s, FM radio and TV in the 1950s, computers in the 70s, mobile phones in the 80s, and now all of this plethora of wireless stuff in the 2000s, And scientists also know that the latency period for cancer is something in excess of 10 years. So the young generation using it today, they're not aware of what is happening to them. And scientists will tell you that all of this EMR or radiation from all of these devices is cumulative. Like, it all adds up. So you can't just look at a smart meter in isolation or a baby monitor in isolation. And speaking of a baby monitor, like a baby monitor and most of these other devices today, they all emit pulsed microwave radiation, which is even more dangerous than the microwave radiation you get out of your microwave oven, and they use the same frequency, 2.4 gigahertz.
People don't know the difference usually between ionizing radiation, non-ionizing, and thermal, there's so many elements here because don't forget, folks, I mean, the companies tell us. I mean, I even talked to Patricia Daly, head of the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority, and, you know, according to BC Hydro and these companies and VCH, the health officers, I mean, hey, this is all safe. There's no health concerns here. And I guess that's the more nefarious piece. But really get into this pulse microwave radiation for people that don't really understand how this works, Jerry.
The body works on a very, very minuscule, like vanishingly small DC current. It's difficult to measure. That's how slight it is. So therefore, almost anything any electrical field that will interfere with it will harm you. But then when you come along with something that is like a pulse, it does injury to the body. The body tries to defend itself, but it gets tired of defending itself because these pulses are incessant, and therefore it breaks down the immune system.
And I would imagine it would affect the blood-brain barrier as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, I mean, you're military. You're an expert on this is the perfect weapon, wouldn't you say?
Well, that's what the military have said, and they come out and stated categorically that the frequency range between, I think it's 800 megahertz and 5.1 gigahertz is the perfect realm for the military, and they consider that to be their own particular province. And like people in the military, like I was in electronic warfare, and I was at the national headquarters, like the Pentagon level in the States, but in Canada's National Defense Headquarters. I was in the Directorate of Electronic Warfare in Ottawa in electronic warfare. And the militaries of the world, all the militaries, the Chinese, the Russians, know that the microwave weapon is the perfect weapon. It cannot, none of the human senses can detect it, which means it... Well, they've had electronic warfare weapons out, for goodness sake, for over 30 years. They've had weapons of mass destruction that can literally decimate a country of even the size of the US of A, that can knock out the entire electrical power grid by using just one electronic warfare weapon. And the Russians have it as well.
Well, so Russians were using this kind of radiating the U.S. Embassy back in the 30s, were they not?
Well, the Soviets did that to show their displeasure with the American scientists who chose to ignore them for 23 years, from 1953 to 1976. But they only did it for 6 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and they radiated the same frequencies that we have in our cell phones today and in our smart meters today, only they use even less doggone power than we have. And here we're using our cell phones. That is, when Dr. Pressley, what she said was correct in terms of most of our devices today, like a Wi-Fi router, for example, it's on constantly, even if you're not using it. A cordless telephone today is on constantly. It pulses constantly, even if you're not using it. Even when you finish your conversation, you supposedly hang up your telephone. Even when you put it back on the cradle, in North America, that doggone cordless phone pulses away at 2.4 gigahertz, which is the same frequency as your microwave oven, only it's pulsing, whereas your microwave oven doesn't. In Europe, at least, they have the common sense, and I guess the political will, that when you hang up a cordless phone in Europe, at least the power shuts off.
Right. Barry Charles has been known on record to say that this is the wireless radiation kills more people than anything in the world. I mean, it's genocide, according to him. And I mean, if you really scratch the surface of this very sinister, nefarious thing, quite frightening, really. I would really like you, Dr. Pressley, to really get into, again, just explain this for our listeners that are kind of new to this, really the electrical design of smart meters and how it employs this switching mode, generates very high levels of electromagnetic frequency, EMF, from what I understand. Help people understand this.
Yeah, there's about 3 mechanisms in these smart meters that cause problems. And let me walk through each one of them. First of all is the radiation. And as Mr. Flynn had said, it's microwave radiation and high, energy radio frequency. So that has its own problem because of how it attacks your cells. And it basically, think of it, the microwave frequency is 2.45 gigahertz. That's the same frequency that your microwave oven uses. Imagine it's cooking your cells at the cellular, microcellular level. And we've seen in the movie, I'm sure your listeners are aware of the Take Back Your Power documentary, and in that they show how the blood cell walls are absolutely ruptured when they're exposed to a smart meter. And then when you take the person who's not in front of the smart meter, their blood cell walls are just normal. So think of it as this radiation is basically cooking your cells and exploding your cell walls. Okay, that's one thing. So that's one thing that the radiation does directly. The second thing that is occurring is this switching mode power supply that they have to put into these electrical devices to manage the power that these things are needing to operate. And the switching mode power supply, you can go look online and do some research on those, and they are very efficient at managing power, which is what the electric companies want them to do. Because imagine the electrical usage that's occurring with these pulses that are happening. In a city here in Austin, you've got 500,000 smart meters pulsing constantly. That's a big use of electricity. So you have to have a power management system that is efficient. So those things cause a lot of dirty electricity, voltage transients across your electrical circuitry of your home, and those units are called volts per second, and it's a very high number. The third mechanism, which is kind of subtle, is this radiation, as it's pulsing, also excites the electrons in the wiring of your home. So think of that light, it sends this huge pulse out. Well, the electrical circuits are made of wire, and that's metal. And those metals are made up of, it's a conductor, has a very high flow of electrons, has a low resistance. Those electrons will jump, will pulse, just because of that radiation pulse. So now you have 3 mechanisms causing problems. The radiation, causing cellular damage. You have the switching mode power supply, which causes a huge amount of dirty electricity. And then you have the pulse itself, which is generating, on top of that, more dirty electricity. It is just a recipe for disaster. I just want to, reiterate to people how dangerous this stuff is, and I'd like to spend some time talking about solutions and how we can protect ourselves. And I know you'll get to that, but I just want to put that out there because there are a lot of people that are sensitive, a lot of people that are aware of their health and aware of the effects of these things. And one thing Mr. Flynn said that was just fascinating, and I want to just give a little anecdotal story. I was traveling a couple months ago, and I was in a bed and breakfast, and the reason I stayed at the bed and breakfast is because I wanted to be away from a cell tower, because cell towers are doing the same thing to us. So I asked the woman who owned the bed and breakfast, I said, could you please turn off your cordless phone? And because I'm very sensitive to these type of radiation and stuff. And she thought I was a little crazy, of course, but she agreed to do it. And so when I was getting ready for bed, I just went to check and see if she had done it. She'd forgotten. So I went ahead and unplugged them myself. And so about 6 o'clock in the morning, my body could feel that she turned them back on. And I wasn't sure, because, what, maybe it was something else, So I went down to breakfast at the bed and breakfast, and I asked her, I said, well, first of all, I said, thank you for letting me turn this off. And I said, I woke up this morning, and it felt like you turned them back on about 6 in the morning. And she said, I turned them on at 6:05.
Wow.
No kidding. And so for some reason, I have this gift. I don't know if it's a gift or a curse, but I can feel these things. And I can be near someone with an iPad, and I can, start to feel my body starts to vibrate. And I will ask them to turn it off because it's just, a lot of radiation. And I've never had anybody say no, quite honestly. So,
obviously the health effects, because there's been so many documented reports of the negative health effects associated with the smart meters, so many different peer-reviewed.
I'd just like to interject. There's one other thing, Dr. Pressley, you might mention, that with the smart meter or any of those wireless devices, there's a fourth factor, which is also very dangerous, and increasingly more scientists believe it may be as harmful as the radiation itself, and that's called the modulation frequency. Getting back to the human body or any living organism, every organ of your body has its own resonant frequency. For example, the human heart is typically 2 hertz, so the human brain ranges from 1 to 30 hertz. So if you've got one of these, any electromagnetic radiating device or any wireless device, if it's modulated, say the modulated frequency, that is the frequency which actually carrying the intelligence, falls within the range of, say, 1 to 30 hertz, such as a Tetra telephone. A Tetra stands for terrestrial radio, which police forces and electric utilities are beginning to use around the world, but they're not aware of it themselves. Their modulation frequency is actually 17 hertz, which is right smack in the middle of where the human brain is. And so they don't, and by the way, if you just Google Barry Trower and Tetra radio, you'll see where he's represented the British Constabulary throughout Great Britain in their lawsuit against the Tetra telephones for that reason.
Could I, just for a second, before we move on from that, Jerry, is there an amplification factor? So if you've got more than one device emitting on the same frequencies, that the total amount that you get is increased? And then also with that, are frequencies that cancel each other out? What's the sum total or net effect of all the different devices in a home?
Okay, well, I'm not a scientist, but I spent 22 years in the wireless radio business, like internationally, so I know full well that anything that operates on the same frequency is going to interfere with each other, which, by the way, brings up the question, how in heaven's name can these smart meters give you accurate readings of your electricity consumption when all of your neighbors are operating on the same frequency, and the antennas are all omnidirectional, like they're not unidirectional, so they radiate in 360 degrees essentially. So every antenna and they all radiate for a distance of about 3 kilometers, like 2 miles. So that means that in this neighborhood of, say, 500 homes, every single home, smart meter, the local area network transmitter, okay, which operates on 900 megahertz, it will radiate every other single home in that whole entire community, and in turn be radiated by each and every other home in that community. Similarly, the other transmitter, which is called the Zigbee, which does operate on the 2.4 gigahertz, and that will control all of the eventual smart appliances that the electric utilities everywhere expect your home and my home will have, and they expect that a typical home will have 15 smart appliances, from your fridge to your stove to your furnace, hot water tank, and so on. And each of those appliances will have its own Zigbee-compatible microwave transmitter, pulsing away on 2.4 gigahertz. So when you just see the sheer, the cacophony, if you could see the cacophony, the cacophony of wireless radiation that is in just one little community, and that, by the way, is speaking only of smart meters. It's got nothing to do with all the constellation of other wireless devices that are operating on different frequencies and similar. And then when you realize also that a baby monitor, if you buy the more expensive one, will actually radiate for 2,000 feet. So even your baby monitor is reading your neighbors and they yours.
So what I hear you saying, it's a totality of all these, cumulative effects of all this radiation that we're getting bathed in, really. I mean, we're getting fried in all this stuff.
Absolutely. That's why the scientists call it electropollution or electrosmog.
I guess that answers a lot of my question, but if the frequencies are the same, that's one thing, but then the frequency doesn't amplify each other, but the amount of energy that's being put out will amplify it. It's cumulative, isn't it? Is that a fair assessment?
think the frequencies, even if they're not the same frequencies, can still have interference. They can have constructive and destructive interference, and I think that's very valid.
That's absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to really get to the health issues. I want to really I think people can understand this if we explain this very simply. Think of your blood at the cellular level. Your blood is made up of two major components. It's red because of the iron, and iron is a metal. It is it has a round shape, bowl shape, because it's full of water. So you have two things in your red blood cells, iron and water. First of all, iron is an antenna, and water can be heated up from the frequencies that the smart meters are putting out, which is this microwave level wavelength and frequency. So here you have an antenna, your red blood cells, and you have water, and so they're going to heat up. And what happens is those cell walls distort and they rupture. And so that's the very basic cellular thing that happens with these exposures. Now, there's bigger symptoms that occur because these things happen. You have inflammation, and inflammation is really the root symptom that occurs. And because of inflammation, you get headaches, you get migraines. You can have concentration problems because your neurons in your brain are not transferring as quickly because you're swollen. You can have chest pains. My husband and I were having muscle contractions. I can feel kind of electrical stimulations on the top of my skin, and I'll have palpitations. So all of these things, you have electrical kind of symptoms, which are the sensations on the skin and the contractions of your muscles that are involuntary, but then you have this inflammation. Chronic inflammation can cause cancer, it can cause autoimmune diseases, and it can cause all kinds of problems because exactly what Mr. Flynn said, your body is exhausted, and it cannot keep up with it's tired of defending itself. This really is the bottom line why this radiation, we just cannot tolerate it over and over and over. It's like that light switch in the room going on and off constantly. It's never off.
Well, and the interesting thing is because the radiation, from what I understand from both you and Mr. Flynn, these emissions are not visible to the eyes. We're not even consciously aware of the huge amount of how we're getting radiated. All this emissions from these pulsating smart meters, etc. And our bodies are sensitive and feel the effects. Yet, we don't. I don't think it makes sense to the body because we are being inundated. So essentially, I think what you're saying, Dr. Pressley, is all this, sleeplessness, inflammation, involuntary muscle twitches, all this stuff. That's dire enough, but that can lead to other serious health issues such as, like you just said, fatigue, depression, cancer, etc.
Absolutely, and think about this. Think of the cell walls; they're ruptured. So your body has to now go make a new red blood cell, and so what happens to that? Anemia is a huge symptom. I can't tell you how many doctors here in Austin I have spoken with, and many of their smart meter patients, all right, have come in and they've done blood tests, and they're anemic. I was anemic. My husband was anemic. My friends who have their dogs sleep by their smart meter is anemic. And so your body is exhausted from having to constantly regenerate these red blood cells, and then you just don't have the components in your
husband being anemic is rather odd because men typically aren't anemic.
Exactly.
That's a weird anomaly.
Exactly, and I can't tell you how many men that I know of that, yes, they were diagnosed with anemia because, women are common. We have anemia very frequently depending on our cycles, et cetera. Men, it's a very rare occurrence, and I have seen this over and over and over again. This, to me, is one of the major symptoms that doctors are missing is anemia. Why are you anemic? Why is this male anemic? Why is their dog, my friend's dog was anemic? The dog was sleeping next to the smart meter. And so, just imagine how exhausted our bodies are. They are tired. We can't see this stuff, but our bodies, our cellular level, components are sensing this thing. But we can't.
Weigh in on that, Jerry.
Well, there's a doctor in Seattle, Washington. The person's name is Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, Klinghardt. He's very well known and has a growing reputation. I have a number of meters here, similar to, I'm sure, what Dr. Pressley has, but he has a meter. It's the HFP 35C analyzer measures radiation, and he says, and he's done a study where he can, if he has a female patient come to him and say that she's pregnant or suspects she's pregnant, assuming that he finds that she is, he can tell her with some certainty that he can go into her home with one of these radio frequency meters, actually measure the ambient level of radiation in her home, particularly in the bedroom, and depending on the reading, he can tell her with a great degree of accuracy whether or not she will have an autistic child. Speaking of autism, 30 years ago in Ontario, Canada, which is our most populous province, the incidence of autism was something like 1 in 10,000 people. 1 in 10,000, just 30 years ago. Today it's less than 1 in 88.
Well, I mean, look at the documented cases of, I mean, you talk about cancer on the rise, autism on the rise. It's the gambit. You know, we're getting pummeled 6 ways to Sunday. I mean, it's not bad enough that we have chemtrails and, you know, gene engineering is a sci-fi in itself, and the GMO and frankenfoods, and then on top of it, we're getting bathed in all this nightmare electromagnetic radiation. You know, there's cell towers on every corner. Street lamps now have them. I mean, where do we start with all this, Dr. Pressley?
Well, it's a very good question. And, you know, I think talking about what we can do, what is within our power, and I love thinking about this because we're not victims. We have a lot of choices. And, you know, I tell everybody that I work with, you know, we get a lot of requests here to come and help someone at their home, they're hurting, and what recommendations would we make? And so my first recommendation is use your power and turn off every single wireless device that you have in your home if you can get by without it during the day. Now, at night, turn every single wireless device off. Unplug your router, unplug your cordless phone. Take the battery out of your cell phone. Now, it's interesting. Look at these iPhones. You can't even remove the battery. They have made it so you are a constant cell tower, okay? So I tell everybody, please turn every single wireless device that you have in your home off, and your wireless printers, unplug your computer, every single thing, and, you know, your Xbox. That's our first recommendation, and that's what we can do. That is our responsibility for our own health, so that when we're sleeping, we have the best case possible. The second thing we recommend is, you know, if you can opt out of your smart meter, opt out of it. We have an opt-out program here in Austin. It's the first in Texas, and we're working with our Public Utility Commission to make sure that, you know, the model that we have in Austin is getting applied across the state. So that, you know, and if you cannot opt out, there are some options. There is a thing called a radiant barrier. It's a construction material that kind of like has a mylar surface to it. I would put something like that on the inside of our homes next to the smart meter so that you're reflecting the radiation itself back off of you. I do not recommend covering your smart meter because think about what that does. It reflects the energy back into the wiring of your home. We've tried so many things. My husband and I, for the last year and a half, trying to figure out how we fix, you know, our issues, and we made some mistakes, and we've made things worse in some cases. I am not a fan of covering the meter because it reflects all of the energy, the radiation, back into the wiring of your home. And again, wires are like an antenna, so you can put a barrier on the inside of your house or on the back side of the meter so that it, you know, at least pushes it doesn't get into your house. Then I recommend using Stetzer filters. Stetzer filters are really good at reducing the dirty electricity. So you have to deal with both things. You have to deal with the radiation and you have to deal with the dirty electricity. The Stetzer filters are excellent with that. I have seen, you know, when we had our smart meter on our house, our Stetzer meter reading was about 600 volts per second. When they replaced the meter with an analog, it went down to 100 volts per second. And with multiple filters, we could get our house down below 15 volts per second, which is a very calm, stable environment. It's funny, you know, it's just they're not cheap, these Stetzer filters, but I do think they are absolutely worth the money that we have to pay for them, you know, for that for that device?
Well, I phoned top dogs at our BC Hydro and other companies, and, they snidely told me, tough luck. Too bad. A lot of the contracted companies, Corex, et cetera, will come out. They'll just rip off people that say, listen, my analog is staying. Some of these guys told me, well, go try solar power and wind turbine. Otherwise, beat it. You'll do it and like it. I mean, this is really disturbing. The more the surveillance is one issue, but when you have a government-regulated companies that are storming on people's properties, coming in when they're not home, switching these things out, I mean, this is this is unbelievable.
It is. It's disgusting. And one thing I want to highlight to people that may not, and we didn't know this until we started going around here in Austin and measuring different people that needed some help. Solar panels, when you have solar panels on your house, that's a double whammy. You first of all have to have another meter to manage that solar power generation that's going back to the city, that's going back into the grid. I've had people here in Austin with solar panels on their home, and they have 4 different new extra smart meters. Can you imagine
wow.
that?
But the wind turbine is the same idea as the pulse free. I mean, that's why they abandoned them in Europe. I'm way in on that, Jerry, because, you know more about the solar power and the wind turbines, but didn't they scrap all that in Europe because of the same idea of this pulse microwave radiation kind of idea?
No, it's that they're not nearly as healthy as people think they are. One thing that needs to be looked at here is what's the cause of all this? Like, who's behind all this? And I was in the intelligence community for, as I mentioned, 22 plus years. And I was part of what they call the Five Eyes organization. That is US Eyes, Aussie Eyes, Can Eyes, New Zealand, and the UK. Well, these same 5 countries are the pushes behind the smart meters. Only these 5 countries. And you have to look at who are the major pullers of the strings, like the puppets. And you only have to look at what is called the IEEE, which is the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. Within the IEEE, there is an organization called the ICES, the International Committee on Electromagnetic Safety. But if you look at who the doggone members of that are, you'll find out it's the U.S. Army, the U.S. Air Force, Motorola, of which Dr. Pressley used to work, Nokia, Siemens, Alcatel-Lucent, and Bell.
So who are the globalists?
So they're the people right in Washington that are determining what the so-called safety level for radiation exposure, which eventually will be adopted by the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, which is nothing but political appointees by, in this case, like President Obama, and that'll become like the U.S. national standard that everybody will follow. But nobody, or it seems that people don't realize that the IEEE, just like the WHO, the World Health Organization, just like the ICNIRP, the International Committee on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, and also Health Canada, they all observe only protection, albeit very briefly, for what they call thermal radiation, like a microwave oven. So the IEEE, the FCC, the WHO, like the World Health Organization, that the radiation does not heat the skin, it therefore must be harmless. And that's exactly the way they go on. And that is why they keep refuting people like Dr. Pressley and me and Dr. Ball and anybody else who's trying to make an issue. Do you realize that in Russia and China and Italy and Switzerland and a host of other, especially Eastern European countries, their radiation safety levels are at least 100 times lower than the U.S. and Canada and Great Britain and the Five Eyes countries. The Austrian Health Association have recommended reducing our radiation levels by 1 million times. The most authoritative study done today in the world, done by there were 29 authors, 21 of whom are PhDs, 10 of whom are medical doctors, from MA, like Masters of Health Administration, Masters of Science, and so on. And they have come out and stated categorically that EMR, electromagnetic radiation, from all of our devices is indeed a carcinogen. Not a possible, not a probable, but an absolute carcinogen. They also recommend that all the countries of the world should lower their radiation levels immediately and were Canada to do it, and the U.S. and Britain and Australia and New Zealand, we would have to lower ours by an unthinkable 3 to 6 million times.
But yet, why then, Jerry, in North America, they always claim they have the strictest standards? And if you look at a really excellent point Dr. Pressley made on this movie, Take Back Your Power, and it's on takebackyourpower.net, I'd recommend everybody get a copy, give them out to your neighbors. Back to that, I mean, they actually had these independent tests showing that it was 6 to 8 times greater than even some of these companies were claiming. And yet again, back to the point, North America always claims that we have the strictest standards. That's just absolutely frightening to me.
You only have to look. The root cause is the same as it was with tobacco. That is the dollar sign, is money. When you look at who President Obama has just appointed, the chairman of the FCC, is none other than Tom Wheeler. Tom Wheeler, for God's sake, he's a major fundraiser for Obama to begin with. He used to be the head of the U.S. television and cable networks, like the industry association. He then became I think it was the president and CEO of the wireless industry in the U.S. And now he's just been appointed as the chairman of the 5-member FCC committee. And so he will almost certainly never, ever condone any reduction of safety limits when it's going to affect the very people who paid his salary for so many years.
Well, it's funny. Big mobile, big pharma, big cancer, big money. I mean, it all goes back to follow the money trail, right?
From a Canadian, it's just disgraceful. Like within the IEEE, like the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, this committee, the ICES, which has, as I mentioned, the 3 U.S. militaries and all those telephone wireless companies, including Motorola and Siemens and that. There's a special committee that determines the radiation levels on the 0 to 300 gigahertz, I guess it is. And the co-chairman of that doggone committee is Canada's senior scientist, which Dr. I want to say Fanzendot, I think is his name. But I mean, it's just incestuous and it's corrupt beyond. Do you realize that there's one name alone, Dr. Michael Repacoli, R-E-P-A-C-H-O-L-I, is an Australian by birth, came to Canada in 1961, did his PhD in biology at the University of Ottawa, went to work for Health Canada, which at that time was called Health and Welfare Canada, ended up getting into the Radiation Protection Bureau, became the head person in that bureau. So he, more than any other single person, was responsible for Canada's egregiously high radiation exposure limits. From Health Canada, he went to the WHO, believe it or not, and for 10 years, he headed up a $250 million international study funded by industry largely to determine the safe exposure limits of non-thermal radiation. So he, more than any other single person on this earth, was responsible for establishing the WHO's similarly egregiously high radiation exposure limits to Canada's. And then he went on to ICNIRP, the International Committee on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. He actually was the inaugural chairman. He is now the chairman emeritus of ICNIRP, and he set the ICNIRP's exposure limits, which are the same as the US of A. Okay, so you can see the incest here.
I agree. Yes, Mr. Flynn, I totally agree with you. This is a big, they're all helping each other and they're buddies. But I really like to not think of myself as a victim. And I just want to tell people, the way these guys think is that there's no money in people being healthy. The more sick we are, the more the economy of these guys, the pharmaceutical industry, all of it, right? So there's no money in us being healthy. I want to really focus on kind of, we talked a little bit about the blocking mechanisms, how to help ourselves and turn the stuff off, put some barriers up, use these filters, but I want to talk a little bit about kind of the health piece of, if inflammation is what's occurring and if the red blood cells are being ruptured. So how can we, from a nutrient and health and diet standpoint, counteract these things? It's very simple. I think red meat, which has a lot of iron in it, can help replenish what's the damage that's being done. Iron supplements, food-based iron supplements are a huge. This is one of the things that I take on a daily basis is, food-based iron supplements, and also anti-inflammatories, because inflammation is one of the symptoms that kind of starts out, and everything else cascades off of that. High doses of vitamin C, multiple thousands of milligrams a day, like 2,000 milligrams up to 5,000 milligrams of buffered vitamin C will do wonders for inflammation. It's a huge anti-inflammatory, and it's great for your skin. It helps wrinkles. So there's a positive there. And I'll tell you what, essential fatty acids are a big piece of this also. So these are some things we can do to counteract what these guys are doing that Mr. Flynn just said so beautifully. They're out in this for the money. And we have a choice. We could shut this down by not buying these products, by not buying these iPhones and sticking with these little cheapo flip phones that don't have a GPS or a map that you can tell you how quick to get somewhere or can download the latest song. My phone is a phone. And it may be, and I'll use it for pictures because it's a great documenting device for any kind of atrocities that are going on around me, and a picture's worth 1,000 words. So I just want to get us back to where we have the power. We have always had the power. We just don't realize it. We love convenience, but I'll tell you, with convenience comes, we sell our souls, right, when we want something that's simple. I just want us to look at what we can do ourselves.
One of the problems I've had with the climate issue is that the public can't believe that just a very small group of people can have such inordinate power and essentially be unaccountable. And I think that this is one of the problems that we've got here, is the growth of a political bureaucracy. That's one of the issues. And then, of course, when you're in a specialized area, they're all basically got the same qualifications. Therefore, there's just a very small group of people who are constantly appointed to these controls and commissions and inquiries within government. They're all coming out of the bureaucracies, and they meet the same people from other governments around the world. It's a truly incestuous system. And one of the ways that I saw it in the climate issue in the early days was, you knew who was writing something by the way they wrote it, because there were so few people in the field. And when you were looking at applications for research funds, you knew who it was coming from, because there were only a few people in those particular areas. So you've got this narrowing of intellectual property or intellectual control, but it's done particularly in the bureaucracies. And, of course, the bureaucrats, not only do they outlast the politicians, but if any politician dares to question them, then they say, well, I'm your bureaucrat, I'm the expert, who are you to dare to question me? So they can push aside political challenges to what they're doing. And I think that Mary McCarthy, her lovely comment where she said, bureaucracy, the rule of no one, the modern form of despotism. And so, yeah, there's money involved for these people, but there's also career. There's also the prestige of flying off to conferences around the world at the taxpayer's expense. There's a whole lot of things that attract these people. It isn't just money or just power in and of itself. It's really a whole level of people who function essentially out of control of the society for whom they work.
I agree with you.
I'd like to ask Mr. Flynn a technical, not so much technical question, but kind of a information with your huge level of experience that you have. Do you think that not only are we getting the radiation sources from these devices and the cell towers, et cetera, but are they also coming in from satellites? Because I have a very very suspicious thought that potentially satellites, are also kind of radiating us. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Absolutely. No hesitation.
Yeah.
And incidentally, with regard to that, it was a considered humorous story at the time. But when the first Russian satellite, the Sputnik, started going over, people found their electric garage doors were opening every time the satellite went over. So,
well, it's interesting because I have been camping and went out to kind of a state park and everything, and I swear I woke up in the middle of the night and my body was vibrating as if I were near a cell tower, and I was in the middle of nowhere. So this made me consider that there are things that are transient that are crossing our paths that are not from the terrestrial grounded kind of like towers and stuff. So Mr. Flynn, I would like, can you expand on that just a little?
Like, I see this far more dangerous than the vast majority of people do, and I see that what I think is the big picture.
Yeah.
And by that I mean, to succinctly, you will never see the Chinese government allowing smart meters in their country to be wireless smart meters the way we are in the Five Eyes countries, like including the U.S. and Canada. You will never see China allow that. You will never see North Korea, and you will never see Iran. They're just far. I mean, they're more security conscious than we're absolutely blinded, and we're blinded, I guess, by the military, who have. Well, you must also look in North America or the Five Eyes country. Who owns the media? Who owns the print media and the TV stations and the radio stations? Because if you look beneath the surface and find out who owns the media, you will then understand why we see so little coverage about the dangers of wireless technology. No sensible president in his mind would ever allow an electric power grid to be wireless. No one.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
But it's happening in the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah, it's very vulnerable. Yeah.
So, I mean, what are some of the things that people, I mean, obviously, without a doubt, it's irrefutable that there are incredible health effects. Liz Boris is on the line that's launching this mass tort. I mean, you're very, very familiar with sensitivities. She can no longer even walk into a place now with any kind of wireless, any kind of Wi-Fi. It's absolutely amazing how some people are more sensitive to this. There's so many things going on here. It's a very complex issue, but without a doubt, I think Jerry just touched on this point. We're talking about totalitarianism, control, fascism, Marxism. We've got enough stuff going on without having to be bathed in this absolute sci-fi as well. But here's the thing. How do we combat this? I mean, we've got guys, storming onto properties, putting in smart meters without people's permissions. Of course, you were one of the first with the opt-out programs, Dr. Pressley. I mean, what are some of the things we can do to combat this? I mean, yes, we can write our MLAs, and yes, we can write our politicians, and we can do things like that, but what are the bigger things that we can do and the smaller things? Because I think people really think, you can't fight City Hall. They feel helpless. They feel powerless. I don't know how many times I've heard that when I've spoken public on. We don't know what to do. Can you go ahead and weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think some of the things we talked about are turn all your stuff off. That's within your power. Put some barrier up. Learn how these things are emitting, and make sure that you have some sort of barrier that is between you and the source. The Stetzer filters, which reduce the dirty electricity that these things do, is a huge, huge solution. Making sure we're healthy as much as possible. Clean food, clean water, and I say clean sleep, because that's what these things attack. They attack our sleep mechanisms. Our eyes may not be able to see this radiation, but our bodies see it. And, the supplements, taking iron, red meat, vitamin C, which is an anti-inflammatory, essential fatty acids, which are also an anti-inflammatory. Vitamin E is an anti-inflammatory. So really focus on these mechanisms that these things are causing our bodies to have to fight, and give your body the added, power to deal with this onslaught. So I think these are what we can do, and then have your voice be heard. If we don't say no, who's going to do it?
Silence is compliance. Yeah.
Silence is complacency. So we have to say no. You cannot do this thing off of my home. On our website, austinsmartmeters.com, we have a legal letter that if you are willing to go to the mat and say, I will not have this on my home, I can go purchase an analog meter for $16 online at Hylea.com. Why in the heck can't the electric company replace this thing? Buy your own meter, get an electrician to replace it, and send a legal letter that says, I am defending myself from this danger.
Yes, weigh in on that, please, Liz.
Yeah,
okay.
You've been listening to all of this, and how does this fit with what you're finding and what you're doing?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to say, our guests are just fascinating, fascinating. I've learned a lot from this call. Thank you. I was taking a lot of notes here. So, what are we doing? We're suing the utility companies. We're suing the manufacturers of the meters, and we're suing the installers. And they're all complicit, and I'd like to add the government to that list, but I don't know if we're going to be able to. We're going to hopefully be doing that soon, the PUC, Public Utilities Commission. And I'd also like to get a federal lawsuit going. They funded this, and they're the ones that started it. They should be named as well. Yeah. So we are suing for health effects. I was damaged. We have 16 plaintiffs. They were all damaged. There's actually hundreds of plaintiffs that want to join the suit. In fact, I have a list. There's thousands of plaintiffs. Okay, so we'll see what happens. We're suing for health effects. I can talk about my personal health effects, all of the other plaintiffs' health effects. Where should I start with this?
But is there an overall pattern that you see from everybody?
Yeah, actually, there's a few symptoms that many of us share. One of them, Dr. Pressley was talking about her muscles were twitching, and actually my heart was twitching. Yeah. And not only that, we have plaintiffs in the suit who have medical implants. Those medical implants actually share the chip that Jerry was talking about. The same manufacturer that manufactures the chips for the smart meters also manufacture the chips for the medical implants, the pacemakers, the defibrillators, Zigbee. That's what it's called, Zigbee. So we've got a document actually that it's just unbelievable. It's almost. I mean, I'm laughing about it. It's just unbelievable the amount of violations here. We're only suing over health effects, but I have to say there's so many other issues to sue on here. It's like throw a dart and you'll hit one. The constitutional violations, the illegal Fourth Amendment violations. But what about the
surveillance issue of all of this?
The surveillance issues, yeah. Oh, by the way, I just need to finish about this heart thing and the medical implants. The FDA came out with a statement saying that this stuff can interfere with medical devices such as pacemakers and defibrillators. Okay? And that's everybody in the United States, in the world right now, who has a deep brain stimulator, defibrillator, or whatever. Everybody should be suing their utilities over this. Everybody. You have when the FDA comes out and says that, there isn't a judge around, I don't think, that's going to rule against this.
Liz, do you have a reference for the FDA statement?
That's actually a good segue. Give out for your listeners and everyone your website, please, so that people can learn more information about this right now while we're good segue.
Yeah. Well, I've got 4 websites. The reason I have 4, I started with a nonprofit, but I found out there's lots of things you can't do with a nonprofit, like sue your utility. You can't do lobbying, which we've done a lot of lobbying for safety on this electromagnetic radiation issue. But the website for the lawsuits is citizensforaradiationfreecommunity.org. 4 is FOR. Got a video there where I talk about the health effects that you might relate to, and I say in the video that these health effects are not limited. It's whole body exposure, so wherever your body is weakest, that's what's going to go first. So if I skip the health effect that you're experiencing, Absolutely, it could be related to your smart meter. There's all exacerbation of cancer or precancerous cells that can turn cancerous. There's a doctor in Australia that uses non-ionizing, non-thermal cell phone radiation. Okay, he puts it on cancerous tumors to activate the cancer before he operates, because that's what this radiation does.
Yeah,
it activates cancer. CitizensForARadiationFreeCommunity.org is for the lawsuit. We've got a new group, StopSmartGrid.org. Great document. That FDA statement will be in our document. It's an unbelievable liability. That it's almost like I can't believe nobody cares. The utilities don't care. I mean, this goes into punitive damages. I mean, this is enough. Really, we hope that these kinds of lawsuits just shut this whole thing down. That's the whole point.
You work with a lot of lawyers that are obviously taking this case on, obviously.
Yeah, well, when corporations are hit hard enough in the wallet, they will do the right thing. You just have to hit them hard enough in the wallet. That's the only thing that makes them comply, ever. I mean, the FDA had evidence of heart attack from Merck for how long, and they did nothing? It was Merck who pulled, for evidence of heart attack from Vioxx. Merck pulled Vioxx all by themselves. The FDA, thousands and thousands of, how many thousands, 60,000, I don't know how many people died of heart attack from that, and the FDA did nothing. It was Merck who voluntarily pulled their product from the market, and I think that's what's going to happen with smart meters. I think, God willing, these lawsuits are successful, and the industry will see that it's not profitable to kill or harm people with their product. Even though the government's giving them money to do it, it's just not going to pay off because the lawsuits are going to be more expensive. I mean, that's the only thing I can come up with that's going to stop this program, because obviously our government's not going to stop it right now.
In the U.S. itself, there's the EPA, there's the Food and Drug Administration, there's the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, the Occupational Safety and Health Association, and can't remember the correct title, but it's the Commerce one. Those have all tried to inform the White House and influence them to change lower the exposure limit, but they've been ignored by the White House in every single case.
Yeah, I mean, I feel so stupid about trying to get President Obama elected in 2008. He's just funded this program.
Like Tom Wheeler, who was the newly appointed, I assume he's been appointed by now, the newly appointed chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, when he headed up the Cellular, Telecom, and Internet Association from 1992 to 2004, when he was there as a CEO, his own scientists told him that cell phones were causing brain tumors, and he buried the data and fired his scientists.
He buried that data, that's right. And, I thought President Obama was vetting everybody, and you're not allowed to work, and, that's obviously out the window,
Well, you can keep your health insurance.
Yeah.
You can keep your plan.
Yeah, right.
Right, we can keep our plan.
That's right. That's the credibility of that one, yeah.
I mean, as a chemist, Dr. Pressley, I mean, when you're bathed in this toxic stuff all the time, and of course you talked about, you talked to precautions and different kind of vitamins and things, but I mean, the overarching issue of the fact that they are just doing this, we have to fight so hard for everything from, again, I mentioned the GMOs, the frankenfoods, the chemtrails, the geoengineering, we're getting pummeled 6 ways to Sunday. And I think it's really, really maddening to listen to a woman laying there with her husband, and she's getting these involuntary twitch. I mean, it's frightening.
Well, this is what really, here in Austin, luckily my husband and I have a technical background, so that helps us have credibility when we go and talk to the CEO of Austin Energy, and say, hey, this is happening and no more. We were willing to completely replace our own meter, which would have created a real stir here in Austin. We would have probably had our power turned off and everything. That would have been a media embarrassment. And so we were willing to get to that point to say, we're going to buy a $16 meter, put it on our house. This is not hard. And we were told, now don't go rogue on us.
Go rogue.
I know. We'll replace yours. And we're like, that was very tempting, but no. We want it for everybody. And we were willing to go to the mat and say, no, you're not going to do this, and that's what people have to do. You have to be willing and wanting not to hurt anymore. I just was not going to hurt anymore. I had got.
But Dr. Pressley, will they even check these? I mean, a lot of I'm told the companies won't even come out and charging atrocious money to come out and check analog meters. It's almost a non-win-win, isn't it?
Well, and that's the other piece that we helped here in Austin. We got similar to what PG&E has for their opt-out program, a $75 replace fee, which I can get mine for $16, thank you. But I'm certainly going to spend a lot more than $75 a month on supplements if I don't have this thing. So, okay, pay me my $75. I'll pay the $75, and then we pay $10 a month to have them read it. And we've got on deck a proposal so that people can self-report or they can mail the information, which has been done, for ages. So we have a plan to diminish that. One thing we're fortunate here in Austin, we have the municipality owns the electric company, and they're more workable. But again, we were willing to just go without power because we were not going to hurt anymore. And I think people have to get to that point. They have to educate themselves on what issues are, and we can't just depend on someone else to do it.
Well, that's a great point.
Yeah. Sheila, can I step in for a second?
You bet, Tim.
With regard to Jerry and Elizabeth, one of the things that I've discovered is that there are a lot of rules and regulations and controls on the books. And one of the things that we're talking about here is the selective application of those, that when there's money involved or when it suits their political purpose, they apply them willy-nilly. But they also ignore many of them. And one of the things that the EPA have always used is this term harmful substance. Now, part of what we've discussed here, and I think Jerry's spoken to this very well, is that people don't see wave radiation or electromagnetic energy as a substance. And maybe that's where the difficulty comes, is in the definition of what can cause you harm. Now, we've seen this with CO2, because that's been my big battle. EPA deliberately got the state of Massachusetts to take them to court for their failure to control CO2 as a harmful substance. Well, CO2 is, in fact, a very, very beneficial gas in the atmosphere, particularly to plants. And so the EPA then deliberately lost the case to Massachusetts. They then took it to the Supreme Court. And this is another side of this that I think people need to think about. When the challenge was to the EPA, and I've been involved in two of them now, they don't function under the same law as everybody else. In the U.S., you've got a whole set of administrative rules and regulations and law, and that's what they operated under. So the Supreme Court were forced to acknowledge that the EPA's claim that CO2 was a harmful substance, and therefore the Supreme Court said, yes, the EPA has the right to regulate it. And that means now that the EPA can just go into any plant and say, you're producing too much CO2, we're going to shut you down. They're starting to do the same thing with the Water Resources Act. My question, I guess, is why can't this be done with electromagnetic radiation as a harmful substance, and then how can we get it defined scientifically as that?
That's a great question. Do you want to address that, Jerry?
Okay. Well, I think the root of the matter is the collusion and I think it's the collusion and corruption, I guess, and conspiracy between the Five Eyes countries, that is the U.S., Great Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, that they don't want, under any circumstances, to lower their so-called exposure limits because that will put them at a perceived disadvantage to, say, the Soviets and to the Chinese and to any future potential enemies of theirs. And secondly, it'll cost them untold billions of dollars in lawsuits that they would incur if they ever agree to acknowledge the non-thermal radiation. So right now, all of these administrations, all of these so-called standard-setting agencies, including the WHO, they recognize only the thermal radiation. They tell you adamantly, if you go to their websites, that the non-thermal radiation is harmless, and that's to protect themselves. The Soviet Union, back in, I think it was 1932 or 35, they called it microwave sickness at that time, but that sickness had the same symptoms as we call today electrohypersensitivity, or EHS, which is formally recognized in Sweden. Legislated disability is not a personal impairment. It's a disability that the government and all employers must acknowledge and make provision for on the workplace. It's interesting that the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health in the U.S. of A. recognized in 2005, that's 8 years ago, that EHS is actually formally recognized by the U.S. That's 55 years after the Russians did it. A little tidbit, if I may, a former Prime Minister of Norway, Dr. Gro Harlem Brundtland is her last name. She's a medical doctor by training. She has a master's in health administration from Harvard University. She was a two-time Prime Minister of Norway, consecutive governments. She was then selected or elected to the Director General of the WHO. While in the WHO, she found that she was electrohypersensitive, which at that time was unheard of. She became the first celebrity of any global stature who came out and acknowledged that she was EHS. She also admitted, and this is all available on the internet, that she one day was cooking a meal for her husband in a hurry, and she used a dish that she had not normally used, put it in the microwave oven, and lo and behold, the oven started to spark and all that kind of stuff, and she found it to her horror that the dish contained some sort of metallic paint which caused all these sparks and electrification. She looked in there in astonishment, and she went blind for 1 year. Her vision did return after 1 year, but that same Michael Repicoli, who I mentioned to you about in the WHO, he tried to ridicule her and saying that she was insane. This is all on the internet.
You know, one thing I'd like to add to what everybody's saying is, if you look at the FCC limits, and we talked about this just a little bit ago, they're super high compared to the rest of the world. And,
sure.
You know, I think that the FCC limit right now is 1 milliwatt per centimeter squared. And doesn't that sound just really low? You know, but if you go make the units to where people understand what you're talking about, that correlates to 10 watts per meter squared. And think of your body as a meter squared. You know, if you're 5 feet by 2 feet wide, okay, that's about a meter squared, and a little bit more. And then think of 10 watts. Could you sleep and hold a 10-watt bulb across that meter squared of your body? I think what's interesting is the units they use for these limits are units that are intuitive, and they're not what a non-technical person would ask the question. Okay, well, let's convert that to real kind of number, the units that I would understand, watts per meter squared. 10 watts per meter squared is absolutely unacceptable for a limit. It's just shocking, and that's FCC limit.
But equally shocking, Doctor, is the disparity between the standards that is set in, say, the Soviet Union and also Sweden compared to the so-called free world, like the Five Eyes countries I mentioned, the U.S. and Canada and so on, or what they call the electromagnetic fields that are emanated by just your household currents, like your household appliances and your substations, your high voltage transmission lines. Russia has the lowest standard in the world, that is the safest, at 1.5 milligauss. New Zealand, I think, has the second safest. They're 2.5. The U.S. and Canada and Britain and Australia and New Zealand, they're all 1,000 to 5,000 milligauss.
Yeah, we are out to lunch.
We are out to lunch, and people don't know this.
Yeah.
Are there any studies done where people have taken, say, one city block or one area of rural farmland and determined the amount of radiation energy from all of these devices over a city block, for example, because that would help the citizens to understand, because the figures you just gave, applying it to the human body, that's the kind of analogy that really catches people's attention. Well, I'll leave it there. Elizabeth, do you know of any studies done, or anybody know of any studies done on actual amount of radiation?
Yes, there's a Dr. Andrew Mikrowski, Michrowski. He's a scientist in Ottawa, Canada, and I think his company is called PlanetWorks, I believe. But anyhow, his name is, if you just Google his name, Dr. Andrew Mikrowski, and he does indeed produce those studies.
See, that's useful information.
Some other, like I just also finished reading 2 books by a world-famous American scientist, Dr. Robert E. Becker, Becker. He's now dead. I think he died in 2006 or 2008. But he was twice nominated for a Nobel Prize. But he's one of the leading scientists to this day. He's respected for his research on electricity, particularly, and its effects on the human body and on all life forms. I would strongly encourage people to read his books.
Well, that's very helpful. Any thoughts on that, Dr. Pressley?
Well, I think you can take a radiation meter, and I think we talked a little bit about the gigahertz solutions that they offer multiple kinds of meters, and you can just go around your neighborhood and out in the country. We've taken some measurements like that out in the country here and outside of Austin. The radiation levels are about baseline 0.1 microwatts per meter squared. Okay, that's 0.1. In the city, we're about average about 4 microwatts. So the city of Austin is 40 times higher out in the country, and that's just really surprising. Just 40 times higher from a background radiation level that you can still get a cell phone signal out in the country. Okay, 40 times higher, and then you add on top of that, a smart meter is 75,000 microwatts per meter squared, compared to the city's baseline of 4, compared to a 0.1 that's out in the country.
Unbelievable. That's frightening. But, I think the one thing is that we've all come to sort of, these technologies makes our lives so comfortable. And I think that's the problem, and that's where people have a very hard time. We know now in studies, I'm sure, Dr. Pressley, you're aware of, just what mice and rats are affected by pulses. And I think it's mind-blowing, to me at least, that all these comforts are culling the population.
They use pulsed microwave radiation at airports to get rid of birds, so the birds don't, fly around the airports. And mice that are bred for scientific studies cannot breed after 5 generations of exposure to this. They have some birth defects up until that point, some deformities, and then they're sterile. And we, of course, believe that that's going to be reflected in the human population as well, of some nothing.
Is it reasonable for our listeners if we say, look, the first thing is for everybody to become aware of the problem and not assume that means that you're going to eliminate everything? Because I think some of Jerry's earlier comments were there are ways around this. And I think Dr. Pressley also, very positive approach to things. But even if we get governments and other agencies to solve these problems so that we can continue to enjoy the benefits of the cell phone and all the rest of it. Now, some things you could get rid of that really aren't needed other than for monitoring people's lives, like the smart meter. But even if we can make people aware and then start us on the road, because if you push industry enough, they'll come up with solutions for you.
If I can just jump in, smart meters. And I think this is very important. Smart meters are just the latest iteration of EMR imaging devices. The root of the problem here is our so-called exposure standard. If you read that Dr. Robert Becker's book, he will tell you that the industry did not do their homework properly. When they chose, for example, 60 hertz as our electricity frequency, they couldn't have chosen a worse frequency. Had they chosen, say, 400 hertz, that would not be injurious to the body. for these microwave frequencies, if industry would simply move away from microwave frequencies, which are devastating to living things, and go up into the light frequencies or other frequency spectrum or portions of the spectrum, we would not be suffering these same debilitating, harmful effects that we are. So that is the problem. It's industry. So, but we have to, like, for example, even like the electric utilities in North America particularly, they don't even use, as you know, they have a 3-conduit transmission system, a hot wire, cold wire, and a neutral or a ground. Well, they don't even bring the power, they don't even return it back to utility in the third wire the way they used to and for which it was intended. They now return it through the blinking ground. So you can actually have farmers. There's all kinds of evidence of this. Farmers whose cattle have burnt hoofs from the radiation in the ground being returned back to the utility.
Incredible.
It's a huge problem, but it all begins with the legislators who allow the industry to establish these dangerous exposure limits on terribly dangerous frequencies.
Yeah, like everything else, it comes down to getting money out of politics, like everything else.
There's got to be a huge vested interest, because I recall when they started opening up the bandwidths for sale, I mean, the amount of money that was bid for these things. So these people have got massive amounts of money invested.
Well, see, that's part of the problem is like right now, as we speak in Canada, our government, that is called Industry Canada, they're similar to like your FCC. Industry Canada is, as we speak, it is auctioning off the 700 megahertz, or I should say a portion of the 700 megahertz band. And the reason, and of course, the telecom industry, they're salivating at the prospect of being able to change their frequency from, say, 900 megahertz, what they're currently using on cell phone, down to 700 megahertz, because 700 megahertz will penetrate through more concrete. It will reach in underground parking lots. It'll reach into elevator shafts, down in deep shafts. Also, they'll be able to use more power. They'll be able to put the towers further apart. But the thing is, they're going to make literally billions of dollars. So do you think any government, U.S. or Canadian, is going to say take billions of dollars from industry, then turn right around and tell those same industry companies, well, you must lower your power? I don't think so.
Right. That's a really good point. We've got about 15 minutes left in the program. Dr. Laura Pressley, I want you to give out your website to people. Also, just take, 5 minutes and hammer the points that you would really like the people know.
Well, our website is Austin, AUSTIN, smartmeters.com. And on there, we really focus on talking about the root cause of how these things work, so that once people are educated of how these things work, the devices that, of course, they can't see the stuff radiating, that they can actually make some choices on their own and say no. And I am a big fan of the concept that we vote with our checkbooks and we vote with our wallets. And so the power really relies in us. I don't have a lot of hope that we can motivate the regulators, since there is so much incestuous open door policy that goes on. I am incredibly encouraged by the lawsuits. I think those are very powerful. That allows us as human beings to exert the right way of saying no. There are consequences in our country, legal consequences. So I really want people to educate themselves on what devices do you have that have huge amounts of radiation that they're emitting, and it allows us to have the choice of turning those off. At my home, we have completely turned every wireless device off. We don't have any wireless devices in our house. We have a cable that goes to our computers, and we have to sit down at a desk to use it. We do not have a wireless system. We don't have a router. We have chosen to not have that. When we go to bed at night, every single thing is off. Our phones are off. The batteries are pulled out. And that's what we can do on our own. And I think once people are educated...
What do we do with the cell towers and these big transmitters, though?
Good question. like I said, there's these things called these radiant barriers that we can put in our attics. We can put on a wall where you have the meter or you have your gas. Even our gas meters here in Austin are smart meters. We've completely covered our gas meter and grounded it so that it can't emit. Gas is a whole different story than electric because they don't really transfer you don't have a conductive path into your home directly. So there are things we can do from a building. Think of limestone rock, which is very thick. Some parts of the country have more limestone than others. It reflects these things because there's calcium in the limestone. It is actually a metal, and it will reflect the waves back. And so you've got different building techniques you can use. You can use this radiant barrier in your attic, and it also serves as a thermal barrier. So there are some really smart ways to reflect this stuff back and not have it exposed to you. And again, those are our choices. Now, when you go out and you drive, I drive around neighborhoods here. I will avoid cell towers. I will drive through a neighborhood and plan for more time than going the freeway where I'm going to hit 10 different huge cell towers.
Yeah,
again,
I have to. Yeah, I drive with shielding over my head because it hurts my head.
Yeah. So I know some of us are more sensitive than others, and we're the canaries in the mine shaft. And I love the legal approaches. I love the personal decisions that we make with our finances and say, I'm not going to support this. I'm not going to support Apple. I'm not going to support these iPhones, these smartphones. I'm not going to support buying a router. Even cars today have routers in the cars. Imagine that. We were traveling in Washington a few months ago. We took back 4 different cars because we had a meter, and we said, this one gives me a headache too, and we were measuring the radiation. We removed every single fuse out of that. It was a Ford Explorer. We removed every fuse, and the dang thing wouldn't turn off.
Wow.
Okay,
it's not bad enough they're GPSing and on-starring you.
So now antique cars are the answer. Okay, I love the 1950s.
I buy it. That's
I'm
great.
not joking. There
bought
are
a used Volvo.
There are choices that we have to make only if we are informed, and that is what makes a difference. So that's my 2 cents.
And Jerry Flynn, again, you're such a trooper, sir. You agreed to come on after having open heart surgery. And, of course, people were wondering what the beeping is, and obviously now we know. And but, I mean, again, I just want to thank you so much. You didn't have to come on, but I'm really glad you did with Dr. Pressley, because what a powerful powerhouse of a combination of smart meter experts on all this stuff. And really weigh in on whatever you feel you want to tell the big audience listening today, Jerry.
Well, it's becoming a global problem. There are very few, if any, places on Earth today where you can find that there is no radiation. One of the most telling, compelling reports came out in June of 2013, like just 6 or 7 months ago. And it came from a city called Belo Horizonte in Brazil, which is the 3rd largest city there. And there they attributed more than 7,000, and I say more than 7,000 cancer deaths, not illnesses, but actual deaths, and that were linked to cell tower radiation. And they found that 80% of the victims live within less than a third of a mile from a cell phone tower.
Yeah.
People died from cancers of the prostate, breast, lungs, kidneys, and liver. And similarly, they've done studies in San Francisco and cities in Austria, Germany, and Israel that dated back to the 1970s that have shared similar findings. It's just that industry and lawyers are suppressing this, and the media won't print it.
Well, you're absolutely, you've just nailed so many great points today. And Liz, what are your final thoughts? I mean, you've got this mass tort, you've got an incredible documentary coming up. What are your thoughts as we wrap up the program?
Well, my thoughts are, my thoughts. I mean, there's so many. I guess I hope that people, even if they're not being personally affected like I have been personally affected physically where I can't ignore it, I just hope that they listen to people like Dr. Laura Pressley and Jerry and listen to me, the living canary in the coal mine. Just listen. And every time you hear about a study on the media, just, anytime you hear about a study, I can tell you what a study will say, and I'll be right 80% of the time, approximately, between 70 and 80% of the time, if you tell me who funded the study, okay? So that's how bad it is. So I just hope that people start getting knowledge is power. This whole thing is dependent upon people's ignorance. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to exist in the way that it does. So I hope that people can get educated, go to these websites. I hope that they listen to people that are talking to them about this, because if you're just trusting your government, I used to trust my government too, and it's pretty mind-blowing that my government is doing this to me. But they are, and they know all about it. They not only don't care, I think there's just an outright effort here to damage people. So I hope that people get from this interview all of the factual science that Dr. Pressley was talking about and that Jerry was talking about, and I hope that they get from me that you're going to have to get up and sue these people, because I've tried everything. Suing was a last resort for me. I tried the Public Utilities Commission. Well, as it turns out, 2 years down the road, as it turns out, the head of our Public Utilities Commission was also the head of Edison for 2 decades, Michael Peavy. So, there isn't one area in government where you look that you're not going to find in a position of power on this issue, and of course on other issues like this, where you're not going to find the industry is running the show, because money is beach right now. Money is people. Corporations are people. They're running our government, and our government is run by, the industry. All I can say is they're just one and the same, basically. Tom Wheeler, the head of the CTIA, he's now the head of the FCC. CTIA is the cell phone industry's organization and the wireless industry. So I hope people get that, unfortunately, you can't trust your government to protect you, okay? You cannot. And you cannot trust the industry and all these great commercials we see with all our favorite movie stars. And everything the media is telling us about this technology is all a lie. I hope people get that, It's disgusting. So that's all I have to say. And
well, one of the things I'd really like, Dr. Pressley, there's one thing just as Liz was talking, I remember something you mentioned, I think it was on the Alex Jones show. You talked about, and I think it's really important that people get this movie, Take Back Your Power, and you can just Google that. I think it's .net. And incredible. I think it's really interesting. Wasn't there something where they put the people in front of the smart meter and within 10 minutes, explain what the red blood cells were doing? Because we've got a lot of people in the chat. It's just so mind-boggling what was happening to red blood cells as they were exposing them.
Rouleau formation.
Yes, right. And you can go on YouTube and there's a little excerpt of this. I think this is the most, out of that whole movie, this is the most powerful information in that movie. It is so real time, and you cannot refute it. So there was a doctor of chiropractic that did some live blood analysis, and he took the blood samples from 3 different individuals, and you can see under a microscope, it's a live blood analysis, so it shows the blood cells forming in this dark field, so you can kind of see reflection of the edges, and you can see the blood cells look just beautiful, like these little bowls of rounded and smooth, and they're bopping around in the blood. And it's a beautiful, beautiful depiction of this. And then he put the same people in front of a smart meter within, I think he did 1 minute at 2 feet away, something like that. And all 3 people showed degradation of their blood cells. One person showed that cell walls had ruptured. One person showed that their cell walls were deformed, and then the third person, the cells had stacked up upon each other, and she had gotten a headache. And so she was symptomatic, and it was because the blood cells had stacked up and they were not transferring oxygen. So again, oxygen deprivation, oxygen transfer is not occurring, and so you get a headache. It's as if you were holding your breath. Think of it that way. And so, and then it's amazing. And then, he removed them from the smart meter, and the cells went back to normal. So it is such real-time indication of the damage. And you can go on YouTube and look this up. This is, to me, the most powerful piece of that documentary.
Yeah, and another thing that I hope that people do, is start relating their health symptoms to this technology, because people don't even know. They're at work. I mean, they don't know their headache is from the Wi-Fi, they just start popping aspirins, or I'm just tired. I'm getting old, whatever, and they don't know that the smart meter could be making them old. That's right, you are getting old. Your lifespan
Jerry,
is being
that reminds
decreased.
me, Jerry and Laura, please do tell people where they can. I think, Laura, you have a website that you're connected with that talks about these meters that people can buy. What do you recommend that people, if they want to go check the radiation levels or whatever kind of levels, what could people hypothetically buy?
Yeah, there's multiple meters, and I recommend two. One is the high frequency analyzer. We've got that on our website. I don't get any money for these things. I just have a link on there to the really high end ones. It's called Gigahertz Solutions. It's a high frequency analyzer that analyzes the radiation, the radiation that's emitted, and then a Stetzer microsurge meter, which measures the dirty electricity. You really have to address both issues, and you really can't do just one because they're both contributing to the negative health effects. So, on our website, austinsmartmeters.com, on the I think it's a page called Measurement Devices. We have a link to those. Excellent. Well, that's wonderful, and we so appreciate the work that you've done. I know you met with the Lieutenant Governor, and this opt-out, and you're just really trailblazing in your state certainly. And I really hope, it's my hope that other people sort of take their power back as well. I mean, not to use the the movie title, but it's so incredibly important for people to take responsibility for their own stuff. You just said, we're not victims, and I think that's an important thing. And we got to remember that we tell the government what to do, not the other way around, in theory. And I think that's something that's really important for people to remember, that it's not a matter of just you can't fight City Hall. There's power in numbers, and I think that's a really important piece. What are your final thoughts, Dr. Tim Ball, my wonderful co-host?
Well, this is a superb 2 hours of very, very useful information, opening people's eyes, making them think, but also what I like is the overall positive theme, the idea that we can do something about it, and I think that one of the things I've always said, problems are only problems if you're not aware of them. Once you've identified the problem, you're halfway there to getting a solution. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the same thing as biases. Biases are only a problem if you're not aware of them. And there are two issues that have been talked about today. One is the identification of the problem. The other is the bias. Both in terms of the small number of people who are effectively in control of this and perpetuating the nonsense. So I think that this program today has been tremendous in working towards those things, and I think it'll generate an awful lot, and hopefully it'll generate support for what Laura Pressley's doing in terms of, yes, the financial contributions are necessary, that the idea that you've got numbers of people that are supporting you, I have found that as valuable as anything. And I found that for every 20 nasty attacks I got for daring to ask questions, you only needed one to help you and keep you going. And that's another way that the people can help, by supporting you. I always joked it's a little bit like my golf game. You get 20 bad shots, you're ready to quit, and you get one good one, you're ready for 20 more bad ones.
Well, and I want to really say, Tim, too, there's another big picture here. Of course, we don't have time to get into all that, but this is really also George Orwell's 1984 is, I always say it's reading more like a newspaper today than a dystopic 40s novel. And I think the important part of the surveillance thing is that people have to get rid of these smartphones, smart TV, these smart appliances, all the things that they call smart to me are not so smart, because essentially, we know that there's spying going on. Edward Snowden mentioned earlier by Jerry, and there's a lot of very nefarious, you said, insidious things going on, and I think people have to quit buying these technologies, even though, yes, they do make things comfortable. Everyone has a cell phone. And again, as we talked about on the show, we're being bathed in this. We're being fried while they GPS, track, data mine, spy, RFID chips and everything. They know our bank records, medical records. Again, it's full spectrum dominance over every area of our lives. And I like to say this is a sci-fi, but again, this isn't Gene Roddenberry's true life stuff, and it's time for people to do something. Don't just be armchair patriots and keyboard commandos. Get off your butt and go talk to your neighbors, talk to your politicians, and get on these websites that we've talked about and take your power back. So, again, I want to go ahead, Liz.
Well, yeah, if I have a flyer. If anybody wants to email me, I'll send it to you. I'll send it in .doc, and you can take out all of my info and just put yours in there. It's a great flyer, and you can be a local contact. So my email is contact@thepeoplesinitiative.org, and it's a great flyer, and you can raise awareness with your neighbors. You just give it to them, and, it talks about, it encourages people to sue, because that's what's going to happen, lawsuits, and it talks all about the health effects, so it can be localized. You just in .doc, so I just wanted to offer that out if people want.
Well, we'll make sure, too, we'll put all the links to everybody's information on our website, and again, incredible program. We want to thank, of course, Dr. Laura Pressley. We want to thank Jerry Flynn, of course. What a trooper again. Hope you have a speedy recovery, sir. And, of course, Elizabeth Barrow's amazing efforts in her Mass Tort, her documentary, and all the tireless work that she does as well. Amazing panel of guests, and I want to thank everyone for listening today. Again, there is power in numbers, folks. So, again, you can go to The Weekend Vigilante Show and click on any of these numerous websites that we'll put up today. And we want to thank you for listening. Tune in every week to The Weekend Vigilante every Thursday. Thank you for listening.